Hi everyone, welcome to Romeo and Juliet. Now, I figure Romeo and Juliet is a play that everyone probably reads at least once throughout the entire span of their academic career. And most of the world probably has a general idea of how it goes, but I remember when I was in freshman English, my class struggled with it a little bit, so I think it might be a good idea to have a helping hand. Now, I think that this is probably a play that you're either going to love, hate, or love to hate. I don't think there's really going to be any middle ground about it, but I really enjoy it, and I hope you do too, so I think we should start. Now, the play starts with a prologue, which in Shakespeare terms means a group of unnamed actors called the chorus, telling you what's going to happen before the play starts. So they tell us that the play is set in Verona. It's about two rich families fighting. The kids of these two rich families fall in love, but they have to kill themselves because of the fighting, and the play is going to be 2 hours long. I don't know why they tell you the play is going to be 2 hours long, because they already told you what's just going to happen. So theoretically, you could walk out right now and be satisfied with the ending. But mostly people don't walk out now, so the play begins. Now we start with these two Capulet servants named Samson and Gregory on the side of the road talking about how much they hate the Montagues. The Montagues are smelly, and they hate them, and they're so smug and full of themselves, and they're awful, and they pick a fight with a Montague guy any day because they're awful. Now, these servants guys just want to pick a fight. That's what they're here for. They're to let us know that the Capulets want to fight the Montagues and vice versa. However, when Montague guys actually show up, they don't fight each other. They just yell insults at each other from across the street. And you find out that they've been arrested for disturbing the peace 3 times already. So if they actually fight each other, then there's going to be some repercussions legally. However, yelling insults at each other from across the street is usually not the best way to not start a fight. So when it's about to break out, when this kid named Benvolio from the Montague family shows up, he's not about fighting. He's like, all right guys, break this up. However, just as he manages to break it up, the head of the Capulet family, Lord, Lady, and Tybalt Capulet, all show up and they're like, yeah, let's fight. We love fighting. That's what we're all about. Now, they challenge the rest of the Montague family, who has somehow materialized out of nowhere, to this fight. And just as it's about to break into fisticuffs, the Prince of Verona, Aeschylus, shows up. And he's like, guys, I've literally arrested you 3 times for breaking the peace. And if you do it one more time, I'm going to have to execute whoever's doing it, because I am sick of this nonsense. So everyone kind of grumbles a little bit and goes home, except for our friend Benvolio, who just tried to break things up, and his family, the Lord and Lady Montague. Not sure how they're related, but he's a Montague and they're Montague, so it's got to be somewhere. So the mom turns to Benvolio, she's like, what happened here? And he's like, I swear I wasn't trying to fight anyone, I was just on the street and there was a fight happening. And they're like, okay. Also, by the way, have you seen our son Romeo? Because we never have any idea where he is. His parents never have any idea where he is. So Benvolio says, yeah, I actually saw him today. He seems pretty bothered about something weird. And they're like, okay, well, you go find him and find out what's wrong, because that's your job and not ours. So they leave, and Benvolio goes wandering up the street in search of his buddy Romeo. And eventually he finds him. He's like, Romeo, what's up? Why are you such a sad sack lately? And Romeo's like, you know what, Benvolio? I am in love with this beautiful girl, and she doesn't love me back. And everything's awful, and I'm gonna die alone. And Benvolio says, whoa, chill out. Romeo, you're a cool guy. Anyone would be lucky to have you. So you don't need to worry about this kind of thing. And Romeo says, but Benvolio, what is the point if this one girl in this whole multitude of the sea of hypothetical fishwomen does not love me? I love her, and she doesn't love me, and she says she wants to stay chaste or whatever, but that's a stupid reason. I'm a great guy, and I love her. Benvolio, being the smarter of the two, realizes, oh hey, Romeo, she wants to stay chaste, you're fighting a losing battle, you should find someone else. And Romeo says, never, Benvolio, I love her. I will be true to her forever. But this play is not called Romeo and Rosalind the Other Trick, so we know that's not true. Benvolio says, Romeo, dude, things are going to work out, I promise. Rosalind is going to realize how great you are, or you're going to realize how great someone else is. It'll all work out. And Romeo says, ugh, I hate my life, and I'll die alone. Everything's sad. Now, people like to say that Romeo could be significantly older than Juliet, because we know that she's 13. We never find out how old this guy is. But given this exchange, I think it's not unreasonable to assume that he's a teenager. And that's the end of the scene. Okay, Act 1, Scene 2. Now we're in a completely new place. We're at the Capulet's house. Lord Capulet's hanging out with this nerd Paris, and he says, "You know what, Paris? I don't entirely dig this don't fight the Montagues rule, but I guess it's kind of okay, because that means Montague doesn't get to fight me." And Paris says, "You know what, sir? You're so right. You're so right about everything. Please let me marry your daughter." And Montague says, "Okay, well, listen. She's 13. How old are you?" "Definitely not 13. I'm not sure how I feel about this." And Paris says, "You bring up a good point, but I have money." And Capulet's like, "Whoa, alright, okay, well, let me think about it." Now, Paris is a character you think is going to be more important than he is. So when he shows up, listen to what he says, but don't think about him too much when he's not there. So Capulet's actually really happy about this no fighting rule, because I guess fighting is tiring for everybody. So he says, "You know what? We're going to throw a really big party tonight and invite everyone in town. Send out the messengers." Now, guess who gets to be the first people to get invited? Romeo and Benvolio, who are still out on the town. So this messenger comes up, he's like, "Hey, guess what? Capulet's throwing a party, but Montagues aren't invited. Here's your invitation. Bye." So he just gave the Montagues an invitation. It's hilarious. Usually the audience laughs. So Benvolio opens this, and he's like, "You know what, Romeo? Guess who I bet will be at this party? Rosalind, with a ton of other girls who are prettier than her. You could totally find a new date. We should totally crash this party that we were literally just invited to." And Romeo says, "Oh, Benvolio, there are no girls in the world prettier than Rosalind, but okay, I guess we'll go." And that's the end of Scene 2. Alright, Act 1, Scene 3, and we get to meet the Capulet girls for the first time. So we have Juliet, obviously one of our main characters. She's young and really pretty. Her mom, the Lady Capulet, and the nurse, who's called a nurse but is really like Juliet's nanny. So the mom calls the family meeting to order, and she says, "Juliet, I have some very serious business to discuss with you. Nurse, you know that Juliet is about to be an adult." And the nurse is like, "That's right. She's 17 days away from turning 14. You know, my dead daughter and Juliet had the same birthday, and I love Juliet, and I have this great joke about her, and I can tell so many embarrassing stories," and she just goes on and on and on, until finally the mom says, "Alright, stop, we've heard enough." Juliet's mortified, as you would be if people who were old enough to be your grandma were making inappropriate jokes about you, but no one seems to sympathize with her. The mom's like, "Alright, back to business. Juliet, how do you feel about getting married?" And Juliet says, "Well, you know, Mom, it sounds nice, but I'm not really sure I'm up for it right now since I'm 13 and I don't know a lot about love." Juliet is a lot more sensible than people make her out to be. She's trying to figure things out for herself in this male-dominated world. And her mom says, "Well, that's nice, but tough, because Paris wants to marry you and he's rich." And Juliet's like, "Oh, okay, who's Paris?" And the nurse goes, "Oh, Paris, he's hot, do it, Juliet." And so Juliet's like, "Well, I'm not sure." And then one of the servants comes in, it's like, "Hey, time to party." So Lady Cap's like, "We'll talk about this later, but consider it." And so the nurse and Juliet stay in the room, but the nurse is still going like, "He's hot, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it." And that's the end of the scene. Alright, Act 1, Scene 4. We're back at the Montague boys, who are super ready to crash this party they were invited to. So we're here with Benvolio and Romeo, and Benvolio's like, "Yeah, girls, partying, dancing, I love living, this party's gonna be off the hook." And Romeo is still being a bummer, even though it's way later in the day now. And he's like, "Oh, but I'm bad at dancing, and there's no love in the world, and my life is a sad pit of doom." Now, our friend Mercutio shows up just in time to save this sad sack. So, Mercutio is everyone's favorite character, because he is the greatest character. He's funny, He's way inappropriate most of the time. He's a great guy. Everyone loves him. So he shows up and he's like, Romeo, man, girls are chumps. Live your life. Be happy. And Romeo's like, but you know that Rosalind doesn't love me, so what's the point of anything? And Mercutio says, dude, girls are chumps. Live your life. Be happy. After a few minutes of this exchange, including some vaguely inappropriate puns, Mercutio starts his Queen Mab speech. Now, this speech is delivered very passionately because Mercutio's a passionate guy, and it's centered around Queen Mab, who in mythology is Queen of the Fairies. So he talks about how she's supposed to be beautiful and has this little army of fairies to do her bidding, and she hurts humans by making them fall in love with each other. So, even though this poem is a bit of a riddle, and Mercutio pretty much only speaks in riddles or innuendo or jokes throughout the entire play, you can assume that someone hurt him a long time ago through love. So he's getting pretty upset by the end of this speech, and Romeo's like, dude, calm down, alright? We're gonna have a good time tonight. So Romeo's cheered up, Mercutio's cheered up, Mercutio's like, alright guys, let's get this party started. Put on your masks so they won't know who we are, even though we were invited, and we're totally gonna mix things up tonight. Let's go. Party starts right now. And that's the end of the scene. Alright, Act 1, Scene 5. So now we're at the party at the Capulets' place. Now, it's a real swinging party, the whole town showed up, everyone's drunk, the works. So the servants gossip a little bit at the beginning, and then Capulet comes out, he welcomes everyone to the party, and he says, if you're not dancing, then we'll know you have corns on your feet. Now, of course, having corns on your feet is gross, so everyone jumps up to dance. Juliet gets up to dance too, and that's when Romeo and the rest of the boy band shows up, and he sees her for the first time. Now, I know that you're reading this, or hearing it, but when this is acted out, this is a big moment. Capital B, capital M. Now, this is because Romeo and Juliet have this connection that goes beyond the rest of the characters, beyond words, beyond anything. What this connection is, you can decide for yourself, whether it's teenage hormones or love or whatever, that's up for debate. But the point is they connect with each other. That's what you need to take away from this big moment. It's beautiful. It's important. So Romeo's looking at the girl. He's like, whoa, man, who is that? And the servant goes, yo, man, I don't know. Which is a pretty bad servant if he doesn't know his master's daughter on sight, but whatever. So Romeo keeps trying to get over to her. And so finally he gets up to her after a little while. Meanwhile, Tybalt, who is Juliet's cousin and a very violent man, literally smells Romeo from across the room or something and goes, I smell a Montague, let me kill it. And Lord Capulet, who's probably a little tipsy by this point, is like, no, man, it's a party. Let him party. It's all good. And Tybalt won't let it lie. Capulet kicks him out of the party, and Tybalt is upset about it for the rest of the play. Now, Romeo's finally made it over to Juliet, and he's like, wow, I am so in love with you right now. I'm not even worthy of touching you, but can I kiss your hand? And Juliet's like, of course you're worthy of touching me. You can kiss my hand. So Romeo kisses her hand, and they trade some puns for a minute. Now, puns is a big sign of true love in Shakespeare. What the biggest sign is iambic pentameter, which is in lines of 10 and 5. Now, if two characters are speaking in iambic pentameter about or to each other, that means they are definitely in love, like soulmate in love. So the fact that Romeo is talking this way to Juliet and never about Rosalind is pretty telling about where his affections truly lie. So after trading all this quality wordplay and flirting a little bit, Romeo says, you're like a goddess, but can I kiss you? And Juliet says, okay, you can kiss me, and they kiss. Something important about Romeo and Juliet, and probably the number one thing you should take away from this play, is that their relationship is 100% consensual. Remember that, because that's a good thing for all relationships. So, after a while of more flirting, the nurse drags Juliet away, and Benvolio drags Romeo away. Benvolio is like the party's designated driver, and the nurse is kind of like Juliet's mom. So they're like, alright, end this. So they're on either side of the party, and Juliet's like, wow, who's that? And Romeo's like, wow, who was that? And so they're trying to figure out the other one isn't married or anything, right? But Benvolio goes, oh, well, I don't know who that was. So the nurse comes over and says, dude, whoever you are, I know you're Montague. And that's Juliet Capulet, you know, your sworn enemy. And so then she goes back over to Juliet and she's like, dude, that's a Montague. And you're a Capulet, you know, your sworn enemies. They make both the same exact face at the same time, which is kind of the face, because they just found out their true love is their true enemy. It's a real twist of irony here, but it's also kind of funny. And as they find this out, that's the end of Act 1. So I hope you really liked it. I hope that you'll keep coming back. Please leave any comments or questions you have, and I will try to answer them next time. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time, and good luck studying. Alright, hi everyone. Welcome back to Romeo and Juliet Act 2. I hope Act 1 is still fresh in your minds, and if not, feel free to revisit my last video. Without further ado, let's start. This act starts with a prologue as well, but this one isn't quite as spoilerific as the last one was. It just tells us what we already saw happen. Romeo and Juliet fell in love, they met, their families are fighting, bad stuff's gonna happen, the usual. So we come back to Scene 1, and Mercutio and Benvolio have lost Romeo, and now they're looking for him, as you would do if you lost your best friend at a party you crashed. So Benvolio's a little worried, but Mercutio thinks this is the funniest thing that ever happened. He's like, oh man, Romeo's probably falling rustling around like a lost little puppy, eh? And Benvolio's like, I don't know, but I feel a little more worried than you are. And Mercutio says, you know what, he's not here, let's just go home. I am way too drunk to still be looking for this guy. So they leave, and Romeo creeps out of the shadows, and he's a little annoyed that Mercutio is still laughing at him, and he's like, as usual, my friends still don't understand the depth of my feelings. He's not annoyed for long, however, because just as he says this, Juliet appears on the balcony a few feet away. Now this is the balcony scene that Romeo and Juliet is typically famous for. A lot of people tend to screw it up, so pay attention, because this is usually how it's supposed to go. So Romeo sneaks up under Juliet's balcony. He's like, wow, this is the most beautiful girl I've ever seen in my life. He compares her to the moon and the stars and the sun, and he says, wow, Juliet is more beautiful than all of those things, and they envy her because she is so gorgeous. And Juliet doesn't know he's there, which is a little weird, but so she says something to herself, and he's like, wow, even her voice is beautiful. This is amazing. I'm going to stay here and hope she talks to herself again, which, don't worry, she will. She still doesn't know she's there, but she starts talking to herself about Romeo while he's hanging out below. She starts her speech with the famous, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Now, a lot of people get this confused. When she says, wherefore art thou, she does not mean, where are you? Because after that, a lot of her lines wouldn't make sense. She means, why are you Romeo? Which is a pretty philosophical question for a 13-year-old girl. She's saying to herself, you know what? This whole family fight is stupid. Names don't mean anything. If he weren't Romeo Montague, if he were Joe Bob, I would still love him. So names are meaningless, and love is forever. And Romeo's like, wow, this sounds amazing. I think she likes me. And so she's still talking to herself. She's like, yeah, this whole Montague Capulet fight is stupid. I like this guy. I want to kind of be with him, kind of. Romeo takes this opportunity for himself, and he hops out from underneath the balcony. He's like, Juliet, I'm here, and I love you, and I think you love me. Let's hang out. Let's get married. And she's like, whoa, when did you get here? And she's like, you should probably get off my property because I'm glad to see you, but I'm pretty sure my family will kill you. And he's like, not when I'm blessed with your love, beautiful lady. And she's like, oh, that's nice. But no, they will literally murder you. Don't be stupid. Kind of a tall order for Romeo, but he still stands there issuing out sappy nonsense like, I'd rather be killed by your love than by your family's hate, and I'm no pilot, but your sunlight-like beauty led me here. And she's just kind of there like, ah, you sweet Taka. But after a minute of being wooed, she says, okay, listen, do you really love me? Because I know you're going to say yes, but I'm literally 13, and I don't want to be taken advantage of right now. So I know you're looking to hook up, but if your feelings for me are true, I do return them. So please tell me if your feelings are pure towards me and if you do really love me. A lot of people accuse Juliet of being stupid, but she is way more self-aware than I was when I was 13. So keep that in mind. Romeo says, I do truly love you. It's beyond, just infatuation. I think you're great and I want to be with you for a long time. And she says, oh, good. Hang on. And she goes back inside and she comes back out. And she says, I think I have to go. He's like, no, don't leave. I love you. She goes back in. She comes back out. She says, you know what? Let's make this real. Let's get married. It's like, heck yes. I will marry you. Let's do it. And she's like, all right, here's the plan. But then the nurse calls for her and she comes back in. She comes back out. She's like, okay, listen. I don't really have time to give you the wedding plan, but I'm going to send you a letter tomorrow about how we should get married. So keep an eye open, okay? He's like, yes, I'm so stoked to marry you. This will be great. She's like, yeah, it will be great. She comes back in, she comes back out another time. They say goodbye to each other for like 20 minutes. Finally, she goes back in one last time, and Romeo goes off, probably clicking his heels together because he's so happy. So, this is it. These two lovebirds are getting married without even really knowing each other that well. But looks like things are working out. Things are on the up and up. It's great. Romeo and Juliet is such a happy play. Alright, end scene. Alright, Act 2, Scene 2. So, this is where we meet Friar Lawrence for the first time, and he's a friar, and he's doing some very cool herbology in his friar's cell where he lives. Romeo bursts in, and he's like, oh man, Friar Lawrence, good morning! And Friar Lawrence is pretty much Romeo's father figure in this play, considering Romeo's actual father is pretty bad at being a father. And Friar Lawrence, as you know, most spiritual father figures are, is like, Romeo, where were you last night? Sinning, perhaps? With a Rosalind? Romeo just says, you know what, Friar Lawrence? I don't even know who Rosalind is anymore. I'm in love with someone else, and we need to be married today. Friar Lawrence just kind of looks at him for a minute. He says, Guy, you were in love with Rosalind probably 5 minutes ago. What happened? And Romeo says, well, I already told you, man, I'm over it, and I need to marry this girl. She's a Capulet, she's gorgeous, you're totally gonna like her. Let's do it, let's make this marriage happen. The friar says, well, this seems like an odd plan. However, this might, maybe, possibly in some alternate universe, bring peace to your families. So why not? I've got nothing else going on. Romeo says, sweet, thanks, man. Probably gives him, like, man hug, busted out of there, and that is the end of Scene 2. Alright, Act 2, Scene 3. We're back with Mercutio and Benvolio, and these two chumps are still looking for Romeo. So they're walking up and down the street, and Benvolio says, yeah, I talked to his dad, and he didn't know where Romeo was. And then I found out that Romeo actually got a letter from Tybalt Capulet, which just said, fight me, which is kind of lame. And Mercutio is still on this whole Rosalind thing, because he hasn't caught up on current events. And he's like, what's the point in fighting Romeo if he's just been stabbed to death by Cupid arrows anyway? But yeah, I've heard of this Tybalt guy, and he's wicked boring. But he's also a pretty good fighter, so we should probably warn Romeo when we see him. So now, Romeo's coming down. He's in a way good mood. He's about to get married. He's whistling up the street. He hasn't gotten any sleep, but it doesn't seem to be bothering him at all. So Mercutio and Benvolio are like, Romeo, our best bro! So they run up to him, they're like, where'd you sneak off to last night? He's like, oh, you know, wink. They don't know, and he never says where he was, but it doesn't seem to bother anyone that much. So he and Mercutio trade puns for a minute until he gets a little too inappropriate, and Benvolio's like, guys, we're on the street, please stop. So now, the nurse comes in as these guys are trading puns, and she has her own servant with her who's carrying this big veil that she needs to protect her from the sun, because she's old and she needs protection from the sun, as we all do. And so, because she's an old lady with this huge veil, Mercutio and Benvolio are like, wow, that lady's really easy to make fun of. So they make fun of her for a few minutes, and she trades puns with them, which is hilarious because she's an old lady and she's keeping her ground. Romeo, however, recognizes that this is his chance to get hitched and says, alright guys, scoot, I need to talk to this lady. So they sneak off, and Romeo goes up to the nurse, who is a little disenchanted with Mercutio, and says, Romeo, that guy's kind of a jerk. And Romeo says, yeah, I know, but he's a lovable jerk. Anyway, can I marry Juliet or what? And the nurse kind of gives him the hairy eyeball, and she's like, are you sure you're not trying to take advantage of Juliet? Because she is literally 13. And Romeo's like, God, no. I love her. Can we marry? Because I love her. And the nurse is like, alright, so what's the plan? And Romeo says, okay, please tell Juliet to meet me at around 3 in Friar Lawrence's cell, and you can get secretly married there. He said he would do it, and so we're gonna do it. And the nurse is like, okay, I'll tell her, but listen, you should watch out for this guy named Paris, because he is richer and prettier than you, and he is not her sworn enemy, and he wants to marry her too. However, Romeo is so psyched about this oncoming marriage that he probably doesn't listen, and he's just like, sweet, tell Juliet that I'm wicked excited, and he runs out to join his bros, and the nurse goes home, and that's it. Alright, Act 2, Scene 4. We're back with Juliet at her house, and she's getting kind of nervous because it's been 3 hours since the nurse left, and that might not be a good sign. So just as she's saying, I'm getting pretty nervous, the nurse comes back in with the news from Romeo, and Juliet runs down the stairs, and she's like, oh my god, what did he say? Tell me. And the nurse is kind of like your best friend who's just received a text from your crush saying how he feels about you and doesn't really want to let you go off the hook right away. And she's like, you know what, Juliet, I'm tired. I think I should go to bed, and then we can talk about this, in the morning. And Juliet's hopping up and down. She's like, don't be mean. Tell me. And so after a long while of the nurse giving Juliet a hard time, she says, okay, look, Romeo's looking to marry you right now. Head down to Friar Lawrence's, pretend you're going to confession, and you'll be married there. Juliet literally sprints out, and that's the end of the scene. And Act 2, Scene 5. Now, we're back in the friar's cell. Romeo's already there. They're talking about how stoked they are for this wedding, how great it's going to be. Romeo and Juliet are going to be together forever, and everyone's so happy about it. They're like, wow, nothing is going to go wrong about this. We planned this really thoroughly. And they totally jinx it. So you know pretty much, as if the prologue didn't already clue you in, then you know how this play is going to end. Juliet runs in, still sprinting as of last scene, and gives Romeo a big hug. And they're like, wow, we're so in love, and we're so happy to be getting married right now. And the friar's like, yes, you are getting married right now. This could be good for your families. I'm really happy. He doesn't look happy usually, but maybe he is. He's a stoic guy. So he's like, all right, you guys are getting married right now, and that is the end of Act 2. So we made it through Act 2. I will see you next time for Act 3. Please, as always, leave any comments or questions you might have. I am happy to answer them. Good luck studying. Hope you enjoyed, and good luck. Hi everyone, welcome back to Romeo and Juliet, Act 3. Now, action is starting to pick up in this act, so maybe you guys will stop dozing off during all those sappy love scenes. So with that note, let's start. So a reoccurring theme in this play seems to be Mercutio and Benvolio looking around for Romeo and yelling at each other, which is exactly what they're doing right now. They're walking up the street on this beautiful summer day, and Benvolio's like, God, it's so hot out. I just want to go home. I don't want to pick a fight with anyone, and doing that is probably safest indoors. Mercutio's like, God, you're boring and moody and a hypocrite. And Benvolio just says, I don't want to fight anyone. That includes you. I just said that. Unfortunately for Benvolio, nothing seems to really work out for him in this play, because just as he says this, the guy in Verona most likely to start a fight, Tybalt Capulet, shows up looking for Romeo as well. He's like, dudes, where's Romeo? Gotta fight him! And, like a fool, trades some badly timed puns with Mercutio for a while, until Romeo shows up. Now, Romeo just got married. He is a changed man. He is whistling up the street again. He sees Tybalt Capulet, he's like, whoa, my new cousin-in-law. Gotta go say hi. So, he goes up and says hi, and Tybalt returns his hi with a, I am going to kill you in the worst way, because I know you crashed my party last week. And Romeo's like, whoa, bruh, I'm not gonna fight you. I love you. Tybalt's like, that's kind of weird. And Romeo's like, I can't tell you why I love you, but I'm just saying, we're family now. Even though you don't understand, I won't fight you. And Tybalt says, no, I am literally here to kill you. And Romeo's like, no, man, I'm in a good mood. You can't wreck it. However, Mercutio, who's been hanging back for a little bit, is like, hey, no one talks to my best bro that way. So he jumps forward, he pulls out his sword, and he and Tybalt start to fight. But Benvolio is probably in the background going, oh my god, this is exactly what I wanted to avoid. So they're fighting, they start a little bit of, a street ruckus, but this is pretty bad. So Romeo hops in between them and he's like, guys, stop, you guys can't hurt each other. And Tybalt takes a really cheap shot right under Romeo's arm, and Mercutio is stabbed in the side. And Tybalt's like, whoa, and he runs off. Coward. Now, obviously Mercutio is bleeding, but only he really knows how badly he's hurt, because he jokes about it, and so Romeo and Benvolio think he's fine. But he collapses, he's like, yeah, I'm dying. You guys are awful, I hate the Montague-Capulet fight. And he passes out, and Benvolio drags him off stage. Gotta love Mercutio, who's joking right up till the very end. Quality man. So Benvolio runs back out of the house after a few minutes of Romeo looking confused by himself on the street. And it's like, oh god, Romeo, Mercutio just died. He died in that house, just now. Romeo freaks out. I mean, this was one of his best bros. So he goes running up the street, he runs up and down, finally he finds Tybalt, and he said, you killed Mercutio, it's all your fault. And he and Tybalt get into a fight, which is what Tybalt wanted, except for the part where Romeo kills him. So, Romeo just killed Tybalt. That is a big deal. Because as you guys remember, the prince said at the very beginning of the play, if a Capulet kills a Montague, or vice versa, they will be exiled for disturbing the peace. They won't be exiled, they will be executed for disturbing the peace. Usually it's exile. But he's so sick of these guys that he is going to literally kill them for doing this. It wasn't a big deal when Tybalt killed Mercutio. There wasn't a law against that. But Romeo is now a wanted fugitive. So Benvolio finally catches up. He said, oh my god, Romeo, you have to get out of here. They're going to kill you. So Romeo books it right out of there. The prince shows up. Now remember, Mercutio was his cousin. So he's pretty horrified. I mean, his cousin is dead. Also, there are 2 corpses in the street. And he's like, oh my god, what happened here, Benvolio? And Benvolio's like, oh god, Prince, Tybalt came to fight Romeo, but Romeo didn't want to fight, and so Mercutio fought Tybalt, and Tybalt killed Mercutio, and then Romeo killed Tybalt for killing Mercutio. And the prince is like, whoa, that's awful. And Lady Capulet, who showed up to cry over Tybalt's corpse, is like, I bet he's lying because he's a Montague. And the prince is like, no, Benvolio's not like that. He's not a liar. And he says, well, I'm really mad about this because I love Mercutio. We were cousins. We were bros. But I understand that Romeo was avenging his friend. So he's not going to be executed, but he will have to be exiled forever. And Benvolio's like, that's really nice of you, but we all know that this is going to be really bad when Romeo finds out about it. So we leave the scene with the street littered with corpses, but more corpses were yet to come. End of scene. Alright, Act 3, Scene 2, and we come back to Juliet, who has no idea any of what's just happened. She's still at her house, and she's so excited because tonight's her wedding night, and she's talking about how beautiful Romeo is, and how pure he is, and how much she loves him, because, again, she has no idea of all the terrible bloodshed that has just happened a few feet from her house. So the nurse comes running in, because she knows, and she's crying, and she's wailing, and she's like, oh my god, he's dead! And she does not say who he is. So Juliet is pretty misconstrued by this information and falsely believes that Romeo's been killed. So she starts crying, and the nurse is crying, and they're both crying for completely different reasons, until the nurse clears up that Tybalt has been killed, and Romeo is banished. So Juliet freaks out, because this is what she was afraid of all along, that Romeo was just using her to get at her family, that he was just a jerk trying to trick her. But then, after a few minutes of contemplation, she figures out that she knows both Romeo and her cousin better than that, and decides that if Romeo killed Tybalt, there must have been a pretty good reason. So, she's crying, and the nurse is pretty mad at Romeo, but Juliet's way sad over here on the bed crying about Romeo. Not Tybalt, her dead cousin, just Romeo, pretty much. And she says, okay, look, listen. I'm not quite happy with Romeo at the moment. He killed my best friend. However, you seem pretty upset, so we're going to take this rope ladder, and he can spend his wedding night with you, but then he really has to go and be banished. And so Juliet's like, oh great, at least we get our wedding night together. And the nurse exits with the rope ladder, and that is the end of the scene. Alright, Act 3, Scene 3, and we're back with our co-star Romeo, who's hiding out in Friar Lawrence's cell by himself, crying and wailing and rolling around on the floor. And so Friar Lawrence comes in and he says, bad news, Romeo, you've been banished. And Romeo's like, oh God, no, why? I wish he had chosen to execute me rather than banish me. And Friar Lawrence says, well, that makes no sense, and you're being ungrateful. The prince spared your life. And Romeo says, Friar, you don't understand. Whether I'm banished or dead, without Juliet there is no life, and now we'll never see each other again. And so the friar tries to tell him it is better to be alive than dead, but he just rolls around in the dust on the floor and does not listen to the friar. So now the nurse comes in, and it's a little worrying that it took her less than a minute to find Romeo while the law enforcement is still looking, but we don't need to worry about that. And she says, Romeo, listen, Juliet's pretty upset. And Romeo's like, oh God, I made Juliet upset. And he's crying and wailing on the floor some more. And the nurse and the friar just looking down at him like, pitiful. So she says, okay, look, listen. I brought the rope ladder. You can still have your night with Juliet if you wanna. And Romeo sort of snaps out of it. He's like, oh yeah, I still wanna. Are you kidding? And she's like, but then you really have to go and be banished forever. He's like, I got it. Don't worry about it. Pass me the ladder. We'll get this all worked out. So he and the nurse leave. And the friar is just sort of still worried about everything, but he seems to be the only one. And that's the end of Act 3. Alright, Act 3, Scene 4. We are back with the Capulets and our nerd friend Paris. Now, Paris and Lord Capulet are talking, and Lord Capulet says, well, Paris, you know, Juliet's kind of bummed about this whole death in the family biz, so she doesn't really want to go on a date with you tonight. Paris is like, oh, bummer, man. And Capulet's like, I have a good idea, though. How about we marry her to you 3 days from now? Paris is like, oh, man, dude. Yeah, this fine 13-year-old's gonna be my wife. I'm so excited. Welcome to the family. And that's the end of the scene. Basically, you find out that the only people who care about Juliet anymore are Romeo and maybe the nurse. Next. Okay, Act 3, Scene 5. And so we have flashed forward to the morning after Romeo and Juliet's wedding night, saving all of us a lot of awkward, so now they're just resting together in bed. It's the morning, so now Romeo really has to go, considering he's been permanently exiled, but Juliet's kind of like, stay, come on, hang out. And so they keep, like, little bit arguing about whether he should stay or go, and eventually he says, you know what, I'm just going to stay, because I'd rather stay here and die and be with you. And that kind of makes her realize that he really does have to go. And she's like, okay, you should go. So he climbs out the window, and he says, I promise we'll meet again. And she's like, okay, and he leaves. So she's by herself for a minute talking about how crazy love is, until Lady Capulet bursts into the room, who's really up in a good mood, and Juliet bursts into crocodile tears again to convince her mom to leave her alone. However, this does not stop her mom from dropping several bombshells on her at once, including the Capulets have literally hired an assassin to kill off Romeo from where he's going to be hiding in Mantua, the next town over. And 2, Juliet definitely is going to marry Paris tomorrow, the next day, this week, no questions asked. Now, Juliet is pretty concerned with both of these news bombshells, as you would imagine, but she focuses on the second one first, saying, I already told you, Mom, I don't want to marry Paris. I would literally rather die than do that. And her mom's like, oh, well, here's your father. Tell him how you feel about that. And so her dad comes in, and Juliet says, Dad, I really appreciate you trying to look out for me and provide for me, but I really don't want to marry Paris, so thanks but no thanks. Now, her dad completely flips out on her, out of pretty much nowhere, because he seemed like a pretty nice guy up to this point. So he screams at her that she's a demon, she's a wench, that she's hideously ugly and no one will ever want to marry her. And he's like saying that I'll leave you on the street without a penny if you don't do what I say. And so this is a really awful scene. He's calling his daughter names, he's dragging her around by the hair, and the nurse and Lady Capulet are just watching this happen without saying anything. Juliet's screaming and crying. I don't know. You see this happen, it's pretty awful. So eventually, Lady Capulet and Lord Capulet leave, saying, Juliet, we're done with you forever. You're basically dead to us. And Juliet's been roughed up a little bit here. She's crying, and she says, Nurse, you have to help me find a way out of this. I don't know what to do. And the nurse says, well, this kind of sucks, but it looks like you're going to have to marry Paris. Sorry, I don't make the rules. And Juliet is horrified for like a split second, because she thought the nurse was going to be the only person she had to help her out in this situation. But now that Romeo's gone, the nurse isn't helping her, and her parents just kind of beat her and betrayed her, she doesn't really have anyone. So she flips a switch, she says, oh man, nurse, you know what? You're right. I should marry Paris. I've been pretty stupid up till now. And the nurse is like, oh, good. Alright, well I'll go tell your parents that you do want to marry him after all. And so she leaves, and Juliet immediately curses the nurse. And she's like, you were useless, and I guess no one loves me. I'm going to go talk to the friar. And she walks out muttering to herself about death, which is pretty ominous. And that's the end of Act 3. Kind of a downer to end the act on, but, well, more downers are yet to come. Please leave any comments or questions you have below. As always, I will see you next time for Act 4, and good luck studying. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Act 4 of Romeo and Juliet. I bet you're all on pins and needles to see how this one's going to work out. We're pretty close to the end, so just hang tight and we're going to dive into Act 4. So now we're back with Friar Lawrence back in his cell, and Paris is there trying to work out the details of his upcoming wedding. Ew. And Juliet comes in like, Friar Lawrence, oh my god, and she stops because she sees Paris is there. And so Paris is like, oh, here to make confession, you foxy thing? And Juliet says, okay, yeah, sure, please leave me alone so I can do that. And Paris keeps saying, like, I know you love me, I know you're into me. And she says, okay, cool, can you go? So eventually he goes. And she turns to Friar Lawrence and she says, Friar Lawrence, you have to get me out of this or I am literally going to kill myself. Foreshadowing. And Friar Lawrence says, okay, yeah, you can't marry that guy, I've got a plan. So what we're going to do, I'm pretty good at herbs, okay? So we're going to make this potion. And you're going to drink the potion, and it's going to make you look like you're dead, but you're not really dead. You're just sleeping, but you seem dead. And Juliet's like, cool, dead person potion. And the friar says, so they're going to put you in the tomb, and they're not going to marry you to Paris. And I'll send Romeo a letter to where he's banished in Mantua, and he'll know you're not really dead, and he'll come get you while you're asleep, and when you wake up, you can both run away to Mantua and be happy together forever, and no one will know that you're not really dead, and Romeo's over there with you. Now, this is probably a pretty well thought out plan, especially from the friar's standpoint, who just came up with it in like 0.5 seconds. And Juliet probably wasn't even listening, she just heard the you're out of the Paris marriage, and she's like, yeah, okay, cool, give me that death potion, let's do this. So the friar gives her the little herb potion, which he already had on hand, and she takes it and says, thanks a lot, I'll see you soon, and she books it out of there, back to her house. And the friar is like, you know what, this is going to work out. I'm really pleased things have worked out this way. However, you and me, we all know something's going to go wrong here. And that's the end of Act 4, Scene 1. Alright, Act 4, Scene 2. Now, we're back with the Capulets, minus Juliet. And they're planning for this big wedding. It's great, they're inviting everyone in town. They haven't even noticed Juliet's gone yet. It's so exciting, everyone's so stoked for this wedding. Juliet comes back in. She tries to, sneak past her parents, considering her dad just threatened her life and well-being, after all. But they immediately notice her, and they're like, Juliet, where have you been? As if nothing ever happened. And she's like, I'm so sorry, Mom and Dad. Please forgive me. Also, I'll marry Paris. And that's great. Everyone's so excited. This wedding's going to happen. They say the wedding's back on, even though no one called off the wedding, and they were planning the wedding as she was coming in, so she's like, I'm pretty tired, I'm gonna go up to my room. She sneaks off, they keep planning the wedding, and the scene ends. So we're back with Juliet and the nurse in Juliet's room. They're getting all ready to go to bed, and Juliet is already at this playing dead stuff. So she has the little potion in her back pocket, and she says, Nurse, could I please be alone tonight so I can reflect on my upcoming marriage and all my sins? And the nurse totally buys that she's marrying Paris tomorrow. So she's like, yeah, cool, okay, good luck. Juliet's mom peeks in to say goodnight, and then Juliet's alone. Now, Juliet has this whole reflection on her life while she's looking at this potion bottle. She's nervous about waking up in a tomb. She's afraid that she'll never see her parents again after this. She's afraid that the poison won't work and she's going to have to marry Paris after all. She's even afraid that the friar might intentionally be poisoning her so he won't commit the sin of marrying her to two different people. And she realizes that, she and Tybalt are sort of in a similar situation now because, like him, she will soon be sleeping in the family coffin too. But she decides that she needs to have faith in Romeo and make her own choices, so after a long reflection on her life, she uncorks the poison bottle, drinks it, and falls down on the bed. And that's the end of the scene. Alright, Act 4, Scene 4. So this is a really short scene. Mostly it's just the Lord and the Lady Capulet yelling at servants about the food, the wedding, and the food that needs to be served at the wedding, because it's the day of the big wedding. Everyone's excited. So a lot of yelling happens. The nurse comes in, says, I'm going to go wake up Juliet, and leaves. And that is the end of this scene. Alright, Act 4, Scene 4. So we're back with Juliet and the nurse in Juliet's room. They're getting all ready to go to bed, and Juliet is already at this playing dead stuff. So she has the little potion in her back pocket, and she says, Nurse, could I please be alone tonight so I can reflect on my upcoming marriage and all my sins? And the nurse totally buys that she's marrying Paris tomorrow. So she's like, yeah, cool, okay, good luck. Juliet's mom peeks in to say goodnight, and then Juliet's alone. Now, Juliet has this whole reflection on her life while she's looking at this potion bottle. She's nervous about waking up in a tomb. She's afraid that she'll never see her parents again after this. She's afraid that the poison won't work and she's going to have to marry Paris after all. She's even afraid that the friar might intentionally be poisoning her so he won't commit the sin of marrying her to two different people. And she realizes that, she and Tybalt are sort of in a similar situation now because, like him, she will soon be sleeping in the family coffin too. But she decides that she needs to have faith in Romeo and make her own choices, so after a long reflection on her life, she uncorks the poison bottle, drinks it, and falls down on the bed. And that's the end of the scene. Alright, Act 4, Scene 5. Now we're still with the nurse, and she's back in Juliet's room trying to wake her up. But as we know, Juliet has drunk the death sleep potion and will be missing the event. So after about 5 minutes of trying to shake this girl awake, the nurse realizes that she will not be coming to. The nurse screams, runs downstairs, and brings the Capulets back up. And they're like, oh God, Juliet's dead. No one wonders why she's dead or how this happened, or apologize for being terrible parental figures to her. But they're all screaming and crying a lot, so I guess that makes up for it. So now the friar and Paris come upstairs, and the friar is being a real crafty old dog. He's like, what? The bride is dead? And Paris is literally awful. He says, look, I waited all week to marry Juliet, and now she has the nerve to go and die on me. That's pretty rude. So now the Capulets and Paris and the nurse are all screaming about how death took something from them, and death has cheated them out of something. And it's important to notice that not one of them is mourning actually the loss of Juliet or her life. They're all just upset because they lost something. The Capulet family is pretty awful. So the friar, after watching this for a couple minutes, is like, well, sorry you guys, I guess there's nothing left to do but put her body in the tomb. I already got one prepared, crazy. So let's just head out and get this whole thing wrapped up. So they all march out with Juliet's body for this already prepared tomb. And the wedding musicians, who are now out of a job, kind of grumble to themselves a little bit before playing, a funeral march, and everyone's out. And that's the end of Act 5. That's the end of Act 4. We'll be finishing Act 5 next time with one last installment for the Montague and Capulet clans, and I will see you guys then. Good luck studying. Hi everyone, and welcome back one last time for Romeo and Juliet. This is the last installment, the infamous Act 5, and so I think you guys are all ready to get this over and done with, so let's just jump in. So we're back with Romeo, who's in Mantua, like Friar Lawrence and Lady Capulet said he was. And he's just spending his days wandering around and feeling sorry for himself and foreshadowing his own death, as you do, when this messenger guy from Montague House shows up, a guy named Balthazar. And Romeo runs up to him and he says, "Balthazar, good, you're here. Okay, tell me how Juliet Capulet is, and please tell me if you have any letters from Friar Lawrence." And the guy's like, "Nope, sorry, no letters. Also, bad news, brah. Juliet Capulet is pretty dead, and she's in the Capulet tomb right now." Romeo freaks immediately, as he is wont to do, and falls on his knees and immediately starts planning his own suicide before checking in with this guy one last time. And he says, "Are you sure you don't have any letters from Friar Lawrence that might explain this?" And the guy's like, "Nope, sorry, I just told you. No letters. Rough. Anyway, gotta go. See you later." So Romeo is like, "Okay, I gotta see Juliet one last time before I definitely kill myself, as I'm planning to do right now. But I should get something to do that on my way there." So he's walking up the street, planning on how to sneak back into Verona for one night. And he runs into this apothecary guy, which is a guy who's good at potions and herbs and that stuff. He goes up to him and he says, "Apothecary, sell me your strongest poison, please." The apothecary says all this lame stuff like, "That's illegal." And Romeo cuts to the chase. He says, "Look, I have money, you're poor, and you have poison, and I want poison. Have we got a deal?" The apothecary does the "that's illegal" a couple more times, but all in all, Romeo gets his poison, and he makes his way off to Verona for tonight, when he's going to go to the tomb and kill himself. Dun dun dun. And that's the end of the scene. Alright, Act 5, Scene 2. Now we're back to Friar Lawrence in his cell. He's hanging out. This guy named Friar John shows up. And he says, "Oh man, you're the guy that I sent to Mantua to talk to Romeo and give him my letter. How's it going? What did he say?" Friar John's like, "Ugh, bad news round 2. I couldn't get to Mantua. There's this plague going around and they won't let anyone in or out." Romeo gets out, but don't question that, it just happens. And Friar Lawrence is not really in the know that Romeo is now under the mistaken impression that Juliet is dead, so he's not quite as worried as he should be. He's like, "Well, I guess this is kind of inconvenient, but you know what, I'll just pick up Juliet when she wakes up tonight in the tomb, and I can bring her to Mantua tomorrow, and she and Romeo will be together, and everything will be fine. Nothing to worry about." Oh, Friar Lawrence, you beautiful, naive, holy man. And that ends this scene. Alright guys, this is Act 5, Scene 3, and so we're in Juliet's tomb, and Paris is there leaving some flowers for her, and he says, "Since I couldn't marry you, I'm going to come here every night to be with you and lay flowers on your grave." I mean, Juliet's asleep, but I'm pretty sure her response would be, "Ew, please don't find another 13-year-old to marry." So he hears footsteps, and he goes, "Whew, I'm gonna see who this is and kill him for being here." So he sneaks off and hides in the shadows. Now Romeo and his messenger guy Balthazar show up. Now Romeo's trying to play off this whole "I'm going to kill myself" thing. So he says, "You know, Balthazar, I just need a moment of privacy right now. Not because I'm going to kill myself, but because I need to get this ring back from this girl who I barely know at all. And that's the only reason we're here, I swear to God. Not here to kill myself. See you in a few minutes." So he goes into the tomb. But Balthazar's not exactly buying it, and he goes, "Something weird's going on here. I'm just going to hang outside for a minute." So Romeo goes into the tomb, and Paris jumps out of the shadows, and he's like, "Romeo, a Montague, who was also banished last week, I'll kill you for being here." And Romeo's like, "Dude, I don't want to fight. I just want to be alone with Juliet for a minute. and then I'll totally do the job for you. But Paris is like, yeah, on guard! And so they fight for a minute, and Romeo kills him, and Paris crumples, and he's like, please lay me with Juliet. And Romeo's like, yeah, alright. So he puts Paris's body in Juliet's tomb and looks down at her. Now, kudos to Romeo, because when he looks at her, he is the only person who is upset at the loss of her life as hers and not something he's lost. He's like, Juliet, I really loved you more than anything, and I'm going to kill myself so we can be together again in heaven. So he kisses her one last time, and he's like, wow, your hands and lips are really warm, which should clue him into the fact that she might not actually be dead, but Romeo has not had a great track record of intellect throughout this play. So he's like, thus with a kiss I die. He kisses her, drinks the potion, and dies. It happens that quickly. So now, Balthazar is still hanging out outside the tomb. Little does he know what's going on inside when Friar Lawrence shows up. And Friar Lawrence is like, whoa, Balthazar, you're from the Montague house, what are you doing here? And Balthazar says, I don't know, man, Romeo just wanted to come visit this lady for some reason. He's been in there a while now. And Friar Lawrence is like, oh no. So he goes in there. Juliet has 2 dead bodies on top of her. And Friar Lawrence just kind of looks at this. He's like, this went really badly, like way worse than I could have anticipated. And now Juliet wakes up. Juliet's had a rough couple of days, man. Like, she wakes up from her death coma, and there are 2 dead bodies on top of her. And at least she sees Friar Lawrence. At least that's comforting. And she says, oh man, Friar Lawrence, I'm so glad to see you. Can we get out of here? Where's Romeo? And the friar's like, ooh, yeah, he's right there on top of you, dead. He poisoned himself. My letter didn't go through. We're going to take you far away from here and you're going to become a nun. Alright, let's go. And he exits. Juliet's horrified. Obviously, there are 2 corpses on top of her. There's no one left in the world who loves her. Romeo just killed himself because of miscommunication. And this is looking pretty bad on all corners. And she's like, oh my god, Romeo, and she kisses him, hoping that there's still poison on his lips so she can kill herself, but that doesn't work. And then she hears law enforcement coming, so she just grabs his dagger out of his pocket, stabs herself, and dies. And that's the end of everyone who was in the tomb. So law enforcement runs in with the Capulet family, and they're obviously pretty confused and frightened, because there are 3 dead bodies in this tomb, including a person who they thought has been dead for more than a couple of days. So they're like, what's going on here? Well, the Montagues run in, and they do this similar, what's going on here? Except Montague also says, by the way, Lady Montague has just died of a broken heart because of Romeo's exile, so at least she didn't get to see his dead body. And so the prince comes in here, and he gives an authoritative, what's going on here? And Friar Lawrence comes in back out of the shadows, and he explains everything that's happened from top to bottom, everything he knew or was present for. And he says, yeah, you guys are pretty stupid, and now your kids are dead, and that's the long and short of it. And the Capulets say, wow, we were awful, let's love our children and not do this again. So they bury all these kids together, and they're like, the feud's over! And the prince says, this is the most tragic thing that's ever happened in history. And that's the end of the play. So that was Romeo and Juliet. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. It's one of my favorites, even if it's a very popular one. I hope you liked my rendition of it. Please, as always, leave any comments or questions about it, and I will see you next time for the next play. Alright, good luck studying.